Before I start, I think it's good to introduce myself. My name is Tijmen Hoogendijk. I'm working for the ZLTO in the Netherlands, which is actually the Dutch Farmers Union. And well, agroforestry is one of the topics I'm working on. So today I would like to tell you something about agroforestry. So what's the definition of agroforestry? Some of the advantages of agroforestry, effects of agroforestry on farm level, some tips or guidelines you can take into account when designing an agroforestry system. And I will talk about two examples of agroforestry designs that we have implemented in the Netherlands last year. So first of all, what is agroforestry? The definition of agroforestry is actually combining annual or food crops in general and or livestock with trees or perennial plants on the same piece of land. So growing crops and perennial plants together on the same piece of land. There are many types of agroforestry, and the most common types are alley cropping, which is a combination of crops with trees on the same piece of land. Silvopasture is another type of agroforestry, where you combine livestock with trees or grassland with trees. Windbreaks are a form of agroforestry. Forest farming, so crops underneath a forest canopy, is another type of agroforestry, but that's more common in the tropics. And riparian forest buffers are also an example of agroforestry. Now it should go to the next slide. So what are the advantages of agroforestry? Agroforestry systems provide several ecosystem services like water regulation, for example, carbon sequestration or climate regulation, improved air and water quality, and habitat for biodiversity. It will attract pollinators and natural enemies for pest control, and will also provide some cultural values and a more attractive landscape. But today I think it's good to talk more about the effects of agroforestry on farm level. So what are the advantages of agroforestry on farm level? There are several beneficial effects. First of all, it provides extra sources or new sources of products or income, like building material, other sources of food, medicines. But it helps also to improve the climate on your farmland, so less wind, less evaporation, better groundwater level. And what you see on the picture, it also provides. It could provide fodder for your animals, for example. It helps to improve the soil, to fertilize and improve the soil, so an increased organic matter content. Carbon sequestration for better air quality. Other materials like firewood and building material. But also shade for plants, livestock, and human beings. And some trees could help to fix nitrogen, but it also helps to protect your soil against erosion. To zoom in a little bit more on the effects of agroforestry on the soil quality. The roots of the perennial plants grow way more deeper than the annual crops. So the roots of the perennial plants absorb nutrients deep into the soil that are unavailable for annual crops at the moment. And during autumn and winter, when they drop their leaves, the litterfall and prunings provide mulch. And nutrients are returned to the soil when the mulch is decomposed. And next season, the annual crops can absorb these nutrients. So the nutrients that were unavailable for the annual crops become available for the annual crops. And even when nutrients leach or are leached or percolated to the subsoil, these perennial plants can absorb them again. Less problems with a loss of nutrients. And it also helps to control the erosion, so less runoff and erosion because of the mulch and increased organic matter content. And it also helps to reduce the splash erosion because of the mulch layer. So what are the effects of trees on agricultural crop production? Well, of course, there is a competition for light, nutrients, and water, but it also depends on the number of trees per hectare or per row, the type of annual crop, the height of the trees, how the tree canopy is managed. And the first picture, which is actually from France, from a France investigation, shows that when there are well, the picture indicates that the crop production only decreases a little over the years when there are no more than 50 trees per hectare. And you see that when there are more than 50 trees per hectare, after a few years the production starts to decline and even declines quite rapidly when there are about 100 trees per hectare. Then a Dutch investigation has shown that the crop production in the zone from the tree up to 1.6 times the height of the tree reduces by 30%. So that's when the tree is 10 meters high, for example, the crop production will decrease over a distance of 16 meters. But next to this zone, the climate improves, and what you see is that in this area of a distance of 9.5 times the height of the tree, the production increases over a height of 9.5 times the height of the tree with 7%. So, but again, that's depending on number of trees, type of crops, height of the trees, and how canopy is managed. In general, we can say that the biomass production per hectare increases about 20 to 40% per hectare. And what you see on this picture is that when you grow walnuts, for example, and wheat on 2 different hectares, you will get 100% of your yield per hectare, of course. But when you combine walnuts and wheat on the same piece of land, you see that you still yield about 40% of the maximum amount of the walnuts that you can produce in a monoculture, and that you still produce 80% of your wheat. So this means that your production per hectare increases with 20% per hectare. But it also depends on how fast your trees grow and when they start to produce products, but also if the annual crops are shade tolerant. And what about shade tolerance or the other factors that compete with the annual crops? Other sources that compete with the crop is because you have to look at the vegetative cycles of your crop and your perennial plant. And this figure shows that when you take the vegetative cycle into account, you can minimize the competition for nutrients, light, and water. And that is very interesting to take into account when you design an agroforestry system. Other guidelines that we use in the Netherlands for practical implementation of an agroforestry system is have a look at an optimal distance between tree rows, make them twice the maximum height of the trees. Optimal distance between or within tree rows is 80% of the maximum height of the tree can reach. And for your design, you should take into account the height of your machinery, so you can drive through between the trees and bushes. Plant trees parallel to your driving direction. Plant trees as much as possible on the north-south line for a homogeneous lighting of your crop. And make sure that you can mechanically maintain your trees or bushes. And in general, your annual crop production will reduce with 10 to 20% per hectare, but your biomass production increases with 20 to even 80% per hectare. So that's the more general background information about agroforestry. And now I have 2 examples of agroforestry designs that we have implemented in the Netherlands. The first one is an example of alley cropping, on a Dutch farm, a parcel of 25 hectares. And what you see here is that this farmer chose to grow perennial plants among his annual crop, like beets and other annual crops. On the outside of the parcel, you see a strip of grassland. On both sides, we planted strips of willow trees for biomass production for his neighbor. And we planted about 50,000 saplings per hectare. And we also planted 2 rows of hazelnut trees with a planting distance of 5 by 2.5 meters. And the distance between the rows was 42 meters, so he could drive between the rows with his spraying machine. The biomass production is a rotation of about 3 years, and we expect that the hazelnuts start to produce in about 2 or 3 years. Second example is biomass production. There was an even bigger project of 50 hectares, and this farmer planted strips of willow trees for biogas production and stable bedding. And alternated with strips of grassland for fodder production. And the establishment costs were about 4,000 euros per hectare, but we expect that the harvesting costs are about 1,000 euros per hectare, and the production will start in about 2 or 3 years. Is about 10 to 12 tons of dry matter per hectare, which will produce about 3,300 cubic meters of gas per hectare per year, which he can sell as an additional source of income. That was my presentation, Melinda.
How do you manage the areas in between the rows of hazelnuts? And that's one question. And then how for the harvest? How you plan to harvest?
Yeah, well, the area between the rows, they grow annual crops during the season, and when the hazelnuts can be harvested, the trees are already the annual crops are already harvested, so there is enough space to harvest the hazelnuts. And we have not a real clear idea of how to harvest the hazelnuts, but when there are some machines, small machines that he can use, and his neighbor is also produces fruit, he could use his tractor to collect the hazelnuts with a new machine he has to buy by then.
So and in between, so they're full plants, so there's no other in between the rows. It's just
first we plan to grow poplar between the hazelnuts, but another specialist gave us the tip not to do that, because there's too much competition for nutrients and water. So we only planted the hazelnuts, and he keeps the strips black underneath the hazelnuts. I'm not sure if that's the correct translation, but
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Yann Pivain. I'm working in the Chambre of Agriculture in France, specifically in Normandy. And since 12 years ago, I work specifically on agroforestry, with many functions about the main function about advise farmers to make some agroforestry system, and the second part of my job is to make some research on the agroforestry system, local reference to increase the planting of agroforestry in our department. Just a precision, in our country, when we talk about agroforestry, we have two systems: line tree in the field, and also edge around the field. So, but today I will talk about only agroforestry in the field. So I will present you an example from La Ferme des Pâtures in Orvault. This is this farm. We are in Normandy here. And you can see here the field of this farm. Here you have the headquarters of the farm and the field around. In the landscape, this farm is on an open field area. The slope is between 1 or 3%, and we are in a drinking water zone. The farm is about 74 hectares with cattle for meat, with sheep for milk and cheese, and also crop, wheat, barley, corn, pasture. One of the particularity of these farms is that meat, milk, and cheese are sold directly at the farm. Is it okay? So when for this farmer, there is two objectives. Objectives for his farm and objective for his territory. For his farm, he wants to reduce pesticide use, increase the functional biodiversity to protect his crop, protect cattle and sheep from the climate extreme, and also protects the crop and the grass from the climate extreme. And he have also objective for his territory. It's very important for him to protect water drinking, to acting from climate change and from the biodiversity, and to improve the local landscape. So one of the solutions he wants to work and to put on this farm is the agroforestry system. The project began in 2044. The first jobs we made is the soil prospection, the deep stone texture. As you can see here, you have the map of each soil prospection. We also studied the climate on this area, about rain, frost, the agronomic practice, and also the local constraints like underground networks, is internet, water, phone, other line we can find on the ground. When we use all this information, we can choose the tree. For choose the tree, we use many documentations. One is La Flore forestière française. It's a book we have all the ecological needs for all trees in France. You can see here the ecological needs about water and about acidity in the soil. And here you have the repartition on the territory. And also some personal bibliography about the interest of the tree for the biodiversity, for the bee, for the birds, and also. When we choose the tree, we can make the architecture, the design of the plantation, and at the last, the financial plan. This is the project. We have two fields, one only pasture. As you can see, the line is oriented north-south. This is the best orientation in agroforestry because we have the same light on the soil in the day. At the morning, one part is not in the sun, but in the afternoon, this part is in the sun. So all the day, you have the same light continuity in the soil, on the soil, but it's not easy to make to do that on every field, as you can see here. This is the main field with crop and pasture. All the projects is about 16 hectares. On this project, you have 477 trees. The density is about 34 trees per hectare. The distance between lines is about 26 meters. The crop array is about 24 meters, and the tree array is about 2 meters with grass. On each line, tree line, the distance between trees is about 8 meters. And in this project, we use 11 tree species, as you can see here. Financing plant, all these projects is about 22,000 €, and you have the repartition between workforce, the tree, and the cattle protection. So all the cost is about 1,300 € per hectare. But we have some public financing with the local water agency, about 80%. So at the last, for the farmer, all the cost is about 4,000 €, 8 € per tree. The project was planted in 2015. You can see here some picture of this plantation. And if we put all the time needed to plant this field, is about 2 months of working time. 2 months, pardon. Now 2020 was the 5 years of the plantation. It's too the trees are too young to see some impact on grass or on crops. So it's complicated to say if it's positive or negative. It's neutral today, but the farmer says that for the cattle and the sheep, it's very interesting since 2 years, because the sheep and the cattle can protect themselves about sun when it's very hot, if they are along the line. But for the farmers, there is a work time each year, about 2 days, to control the fence, because if the fence is not functional, cattle like tree, so they cut them. You need to prune tree and to cut the grass under the tree. This farm is also member of an association, ADAN, and this association have an experimental networks farm on agroforestry. We are working on biodiversity, on the tree growth, crop yield, the economics monitoring, and we test new tree species. For example, on this farm, we work on a lonely bee with the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle. And since the beginning of this work, we compare field with tree and field without tree. And the result is very interesting because, as we can see, about after 5 years, lonely bee are 4 times more in agroforestry field. And after, it's not the farmer has a new projects. He want to work on further tree to complete grass in summer, and he want to work on carbon storage. And yesterday we have the information that this farm win a prize, the prize of best agrological systems in Normandy for the years 2020. So, thank you.
So my name's Ben Raskin. My background is as a commercial vegetable grower before joining the Soil Association around 15 years ago. I'm focusing more on agroforestry now. I work part-time for the Soil Association. I'm also project managing Eastbrook Agroforestry, which is the project I'm going to talk to you about today. And I was involved as one of the editors of the Agroforestry Handbook, which hopefully most of you have seen, but if not, you can still download it from our website, and I can pop a link into the chat if that's useful if people haven't seen it. So Eastbrook Farm is in the southwest of England. I mean, if you look at the map, kind of looks almost more central, but the southwest is sort of that big chunk there. So we're right on the edge of what we call the southwest. So I thought I'd just give you a few details about the farm. It's 625 hectares altogether. It's quite an unusual shape. It's very long and thin, 8 kilometers long, and we've got a whole range of soil types within that, ranging from quite high organic matter downlands through some thin chalk soils right down to quite heavy clay, which is where we're doing the agroforestry. Most of the farm is rented, and in the UK we have some very large landowners, and one of them is the Church of England. So this farm is rented on a 3-generation tenancy, which are quite unusual now, but those are where effectively 3 generations of the same family have the right to rent that farm. And Helen Browning, who is also the Chief Executive of the Soil Association, runs the farm, and she's the 2nd generation of those 3, and her daughter and son-in-law are in the process of taking over the running of some of the farm. There's they do a lot of different enterprises. The main ones are arable, dairy, beef and pigs. So Helen Browning is one of the largest organic pig producers in the UK. They historically have also had quite a lot of sheep, but at the moment they're on a nearby estate that they're managing, and they've tried their hands at horticulture in the past. They've done carrots and potatoes and daffodil bulbs, for instance. They also, I mean, Helen is a serial entrepreneur, serial as in again and again, not as in cereal crops, although they do that as well. And runs a whole load of different businesses alongside the farm. So they have a meat processing business. They sell product into supermarkets in the UK. They run the village pub and hotel. They do farm safaris and photography courses and all kinds of things from the farm. So it's always, there's lots of innovation on the farm. They're always looking at new things. So that there's a number of motivations, a number of reasons why Helen was looking at doing agroforestry. She'd wanted to do it for a while, and the issues with it being a rented farm are a big problem, or have been a big problem in the UK. It's changing a bit. So landowners often have been nervous to allow their tenants to plant trees, and that's definitely one of the barriers for uptake in the UK. But for Helen, the motivations were around climate resilience of both the soil and the farm as a whole, and related to that is business resilience. So as an example, the area, some of the fields where we're planting trees historically have been very occasionally cropped, but it's fertile soil and it's flat land, but it's very heavy. So the opportunities to find windows to cultivate the soil are short, and so what we're hoping with the trees is that we can perhaps dry the soil a little, and if climate change also means things are warmer and drier sometimes in the spring, we might have opportunities to grow crops in some of these fields where previously it's just been grazed. Soil health is a big motivation, as I've said. The other big driver for Helen is animal welfare. It's one of her passions, and as has been outlined, the benefits to livestock from trees are well known, and more widely, just a desire to increase biodiversity, and she loves trees, as we all do, I'm sure. Paying for agroforestry is not easy, although perhaps getting easier. The farmer, I think, historically, or certainly in the UK, the farmer has ended up having to fund that. Mostly the government funding has been for woodland or forests rather than for agroforestry systems. The UK government didn't take up the opportunity to fund agroforestry when we were part of CAP. However, with Brexit, one of the few silver linings perhaps is that the UK is very keen to support agroforestry, and we're optimistic it will be in the new support programme, though having spent all our money on Brexit, there probably won't be much money left anyway for anyone, but there we go. So there is some private funding now coming through, you know, often linked to carbon offsetting, but also other biodiversity pots, and I think that will increase, and I think that's a big opportunity. And the other area that I'm personally quite interested in is around the opportunity for community funding and community engagement in agroforestry, and you know, how individuals within the community or groups of people in a community can come together and perhaps fund and manage trees within an agroforestry setting, where farmers want trees on their farms but don't necessarily have the time or skills to manage them. So this is the map of the 80 hectares or so, which is the bit that actually Helen now owns. So this is what changed. Most of the farm is rented. This 80 hectares she inherited about 6 years ago when her father died, and that gave her the opportunity to plant trees where previously it had been difficult. And there's a stream running down, initially down that edge, and then you can see it cuts across sort of the middle and through that area there, and out down the other side, and there's some areas of woodland there and a couple of other bits of woodland. So I started working with Helen in 2016, and the original plan was that we would have a 5 to 8 year planting plan to complete agroforestry on all of that 80 hectares. We're working more slowly than that, and there are two main reasons I would say why we've slowed down. One is cost, so it is expensive planting and managing trees. The other is actually around learning as we go, and really wanting to make sure we're making the right decisions. And I think particularly when you start off and you're all excited about getting trees in the ground and thinking, oh God, you know, there's such an urgency to this, we need to plant trees. And then you actually start to think much more long term when you're working with trees, and thinking, well, okay, if I'm looking at something that's going to be in the ground for 50 years, does it matter if I plant it now or in 2 years' time or in 3 years' time? It's more important to get it right and understand what's happening. So we're trialing a range of different systems in different fields and different trees. So this barn field, cunningly named because there's a barn next to it, was the first field that we planted up, and we've done it in a lovely curved pattern for no other reason than that Helen wanted it to look nice. It's an extensive orchard, really, I would say. It's planted at a density of about 250 trees a hectare. We're planning to have poultry, so chickens or ducks or something in it, but we haven't yet managed to find someone to run that enterprise. And as you can see, wide range of tree fruit and bush fruit interplanted across that field. Most of the product from that, from those trees and bushes, are going into the pub in the village, and up until now that's been fine. At some point we'll have too much, I suspect, and we'll have to start looking at other markets, but I don't think that will be a big problem. We have some local box schemes that I think would take most of these things. The next field is so withy pump. In the UK, withy is another name for willow, and pump obviously is a pump. So that gives you a little bit of a clue as to how wet this field is. We've got alley of trees planted here. Again, north to south, as Yann explained. The prevailing winds, so the main winds in this field are coming from left to right, so we're hoping that we'll also get the protection for the stock from the wind in this particular field. We planted a few trials at the beginning, so in the first year in 2016-17, And we actually planted those without any fencing apart from the deer guard, which worked quite well against deer, but we didn't have the dairy stock in that at that time, so we just cut for silage. We've since, when we planted up the rest of that field, as you'll see in some of the later slides, we've got electric fencing. And yes, we spend a lot of time talking about fencing and the cost and the benefit and trying to weigh it all up. In this field, we've got Perry pears are the main tree species. So these are these ones in the green, and then we're interplanting there. You can see with varying numbers, so anywhere between 2 and 5. We're trialing different densities of alder and willow and sea buckthorn, which we're going to be coppicing or managing and keeping small so they don't compete with the main tree. And the willow will either be wood chipping and spreading onto the alleys in between to improve soil health, or will feed to the stock, and the alder will be chipping for soil health, and the sea buckthorn harvesting. And those are, roughly speaking, about 45 trees per hectare. That's the overall density. So it's about 10 meters between the main trees and 27 meters between the alleys. And if you take 1.5 meters from each tree, you end up with a 24-meter row, which is then divisible by 12, 8, 6, 4, 3, or 2. So you can use any piece of machinery, in theory, between those rows, which becomes important if we're planning to crop them. And we've left nice big headlands all the way around the edge so we can turn machinery around if we need to. What we've done in the meantime, because we're not cropping it, is it's grazed by the young dairy cows and they've instituted a mob grazing system within that field now, which has already started to show benefits to the forage production and soil health, even apart from the trees. The other bit of Withy Pump we've turned over to grazed woodland planting. So this is one of the few bits of the system that we did actually get funding for. It's done under what's called a woodland creation grant in the UK. It's about 1,500 plants per hectare, and it's a mix of around 15 species of native trees. What's quite interesting in this field is we had an accidental experiment with wood chip. I'm a bit obsessed by wood chip at the moment. We pollarded a lot of willows that ran along the field and just threw the wood chip over the fence, and I meant to spread it out more thinly and never got around to it. So these trees on the right had a nearly a meter depth, no, not quite a meter, 2/3 of a meter depth of wood chip mulch, and the ones on the left had a very thin layer of mulch. This was in 2018, and they were all planted at the same time, literally on the same day, and those are now 3.5 meters tall, and those are, you know, about a meter. So the power of mulch is important, I think, when you're looking at tree establishment. You know, it's not just about weed control, it's about water retention, it's about soil health, potentially soil temperature. And this is the next bit of the project. So this is Lane's field. It's quite a long field, it's about 1 kilometre long, as you can see. We've already planted up one woodland block. We did that at the same time as the last slide. We've also planted up 2 small areas, these little red areas, which are going to be browsing blocks. So that's willow and poplar. And the idea is that we'll bring, they're planted at about 1,500 plants a hectare. And we'll bring the livestock into that area to let them graze directly from the tree. So they'll effectively be coppicing them for us, we hope. I've not actually seen these in action. It's an idea I've taken from Steve Gabriel, an American silver pastoralist. But in theory, it should work. So we'll see. And I'm hoping we'll be able to take them in for the first graze next year, depending on how well they grow this year. The purple lines are where we plan to reinstate old hedges. So this had been 3 fields previously, and we want to put it back to being 3 fields. And then within each of the three, we're intending to put alleys of trees, as we've seen in the other field, with the mob grazing in between. And just to finish off, I thought it was worth just a few things that we've learned around three areas. So one is around ground preparation. So for most of our plantings, we've created a slit in the field with a subsoiler. Because we've got this very heavy soil, ground augers actually don't work very well. They smear the soil too much. So we've ended up going with this system, which makes it very quick and easy to plant, because again, our heavy soil can be quite hard work to plant into. And in most years, it's worked all right. In 2017-18, we had that very dry spring and summer in 2018, and the slit we created just opened right up when it dried, right down to nearly 1 meter depth, and we lost quite a lot of trees. Where we'd managed to mulch them, they survived, and the ones that went in January mostly survived. The ones that went in March and that weren't mulched, we mostly lost. So I think in hindsight, we might still do the slit, but I'll plant maybe 15 centimeters to one side of it, just to avoid them being right in the middle of that trench if it does open up. Mulching, I've talked a little bit. Oh, hang on, sorry, didn't mean to go forward. Mulching, I've talked a little bit about already. This is the browsing block that I talked about where we've planted it up. It's quite expensive moving wood chip about, even where we get our wood chip for free or we produce our own. But even just getting it out with a trailer or and a person, or we spread it by machine on the rows. But it's still relatively expensive. Compared to spraying with glyphosate, for instance. But the added benefit and the quicker establishment, I'm pretty convinced it makes it worth it. And we have experimented with mulch mats on their own and under the wood chip, and my conclusion is that they're not worth using. We've had some problems with voles, and where we've used mulch mats, those voles have made they've done a lot more damage. Where we use wood chip on its own, that seems to deter the voles. It seems to fall into their runs. They don't seem to like it as much. So mostly we haven't had an issue with voles where we've just used wood chip, but we have where we've used mulch mats. And then finally, fencing. We've used various different bits of fencing around. In Barnfield and the woodland, we've actually deer fenced the entire field. With the woodland, it was because we got a grant to do the fencing, and with Barnfield, the value of the trees made it worth investing in the deer fencing. But on the alleys, we've used single strand electric. It works out about £1.20 a metre, but obviously still a lot of meters, so it's still relatively expensive. But because we're mob grazing in between, it just makes life easier to manage than temporary fencing. I think probably next time we would go a little bit closer. We've left 1.5 meters this time. I think we might go down to 1.25 or even 1 meter. There's quite a strip in between that the cows don't get under the wire to. And I think as long as the trees are going high enough before they go out, I think the cows probably won't be able to reach over and damage it too much. So we'll experiment a little bit with some of that. But we're also very interested in looking at ways to use, brambles or gorse to protect seedlings, perhaps even sort of adding tree seed to wood chip along with bramble seed and letting it all grow up and grow through. Like most people, I think we're keen to move away from plastic tubes. So we're interested in experimenting on that. And I think that's it. Thank you.